All right, everybody, we're going to get started here. Thanks for coming out, everybody. I want to introduce you to Gracelyn Smith. She's the one that organized this. Gracelyn, take it away.
Hi, everybody. First, I want to give a big thank you to everybody who came out today. Your attendance is inspiring and makes more of an impact than you know. Big thank you to the police force for their support and their protective presence here today. Thank you to the admins of the Lake Mills Citizens Coalition for Racial Justice who have been so helpful in putting this together. Thank you to Bob Grigas for providing us with a speaker system today, and the Lake Mills Market for their monetary donation. And lastly, thank you to all the people who were so supportive to me and this movement on the Community Network this past week. Many people on that long thread of comments were asking, why here? Why bring this protest to Lake Mills when there already are so many happening nearby in places like Madison and Milwaukee? I want to explain that for many of us white people in Lake Mills who rarely interact with Black, Indigenous, or people of color and don't experience diversity in our schools and our workplaces, we don't see racism. Many of us can't even admit that racism exists in our small town. But just because it doesn't exist in our white privileged lives doesn't mean that it doesn't exist for the 10% of the population of Lake Mills that are Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color, and all over the country. Institutional racism can be defined as racism expressed in economic, social, and political institutions. This is reflected in the United States by racial imbalances in our systems of healthcare, income, wealth, employment, education, and criminal justice. According to the United States Sentencing Commission, once Black children are in the criminal justice system, they are 18 times more likely than white children to be charged as adults. Additionally, it was found that Black male offenders receive sentences on average 19.1% longer than white male offenders. In 2016, Jamal, a 14-year-old Black boy in New Jersey, was involved in one armed robbery, no shots fired. 14-year-old Jamal was charged as an adult and sentenced to 9 years in adult prison. Meanwhile, in Seattle, a 14-year-old white boy was involved in 4 armed robberies, 3 drive-by shootings, and a high-speed chase with the police in the span of just 2 weeks, with several shots fired. That white boy, he was sent home with electronic monitoring. The Bureau of Statistics has found that Black unemployment has been twice as high as white unemployment for the last 60 years, regardless of economic changes. You're probably wondering, why is that? Picture a graph of a straight line describing absolutely no change over time. The discrimination ratio between callbacks for Black applicants to white applicants has not declined in over 25 years. Black people, regardless of having a degree, are hired at significantly lower rates than whites. The institutional racism that developed in our country in times of slavery and in times of segregation still exists in the very foundation of our country today. In 1865, the Civil War ended. In 1948, segregation was outlawed. In the late 1960s, activists, civil rights leaders, and pastors, among Martin Luther King Jr., began to meet and plan peaceful protests across the country, protesting racial discrimination and segregation. On April 4th, 1968, the King assassination riots began on the day that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Often referred to as the Holy Week of Uprising, it was the greatest wave of social unrest that the United States had experienced since the Civil War. On April 11th, 1968, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1968, 7 days after the riots began. It has now been 18 days since the murder of George Floyd. It has been 18 days since our people began protesting and rioting in the streets. And in 18 days, our government still has neglected to pass meaningful legislation for the Black Lives Matter movement. After the Civil Rights Act of 1968 was passed, nothing big happened for the civil rights movement for a long time. Despite the promises of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1968, our communities, our neighborhoods, and our schools still remain segregated. Women, Indigenous, Blacks, and people of color are still underrepresented in our legislatures and our Congress. We elected our first Black president in 2008, and people continue to neglect the realities of racism in our country. And in predominantly white communities, such as Lake Mills, it began to be considered acceptable for us to live in a bubble that doesn't include talking about the racism that built our country, a bubble that doesn't teach their children about the importance of racial inclusivity, a bubble that won't admit that racism exists there because it doesn't affect them. It's time to burst the bubble. Lake Mills should be better than that. We need to start having these debates. We need to start having these conversations because that's the only way that things are going to change. That's the only way that things have ever changed. If you have children, I strongly encourage you to go home today and talk to them and start teaching them lessons about racism in America. We need to move away from the idea that children are unaware of racial differences and too innocent to be told about the realities of institutional racism and inequality. They are the future, and we need to treat them as such. I sat down with my 8-year-old little sister the other day, and I explained to her what happened with George Floyd, and I explained what's happening around the country now because of it. She was angry, and she was confused, but her immediate response was a desire to do something about it. She was very passionate about helping me put together this protest, and she wants to change the way that we treat Black Americans in our country. In addition to talking about racism with your kids, talk about it with each other. Talk about it with your spouses, with your coworkers, your friends, your parents. The distorted views that many people have regarding racism in our country support isolating people of color. And without correcting them, without transformative dialogue on the subject, we will not achieve the collective action that is necessary to clarify the realities of institutional racism and to abolish it. This dialogue should serve to dismantle racial hierarchy and lead us to a better, brighter future with true equal opportunity for all, regardless of race, gender, sexuality, or social class. We need to start having these conversations today. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now I want to introduce our next speaker, Rachael Davies. She graduated from Lake Mills High School. She's a former secondary school teacher and a current member of the Lake Mills Area School District School Board.
Thank you, Gracie. I want to start by thanking Gracie for inviting me to speak today. It is such an honor to be here, to speak to our community and to be part of this. This is so important, even in our little tiny rural town. This is just so important. Okay, how do I lift it up? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Can you hear me now? Yep. So as Gracie said, my name is Rachael Davies. I'm from this community originally, and was away for a little while, and now I'm back. So when I was asked to speak today, I wasn't sure what I was going to talk about or how I was going to say it. I kept thinking there's just so much that needs to be said, and where do you even start with something like this? But so much has already been said. The words have been spoken and written and repeated generation after generation after generation after generation. And still, too few are listening. We haven't heard the words. We haven't internalized the words. We haven't incorporated them into our lives, put ourselves in the shoes of others, and asked what role we played and how we would act in those circumstances. Generation after generation, we see with our own eyes, in person and in the newspapers and on the TV screen and on our computers and our tablets and our phones, the unfairness and the inequities, the perceptions and opinions we form for our fellow man before even a single word is uttered or a simple conversation has been had, and the sheer disregard for human life solely based on how we view those of us of a different skin tone or a different name. And then I thought about what it was like for me as a child, as a teenager, and then as a young adult. As I mentioned, I'm from here. I grew up out in the country in Astelin. I went to school here my entire childhood. I graduated from Lake Mills High School. I moved away to Madison. I went to UW. Then I went to Chicago and taught high school, secondary education Spanish on the south side of Chicago in Harvey, Illinois. Then I moved to Washington, D.C., and I taught there for a while, and then I went into education research. And then my kids were a little older, and I realized that, big cities are great when you're young, but small towns are nice for freedoms for young people. They're able to walk and ride and wherever they want to, and you know that everybody's looking out for them. Then I thought about how it's not always the same, about how people are looking out for each other. And I thought about, as a child and a teenager and a young adult, my parents never had to have a conversation with me about what I can and cannot do because of the tone of my skin. They never had to tell me where I can and cannot go, or how I can and cannot dress or act once I'm there, or how others may see me or treat me, or what I might encounter, or that a neighbor or a passerby could call the police because I somehow look suspicious, or that I might fit the very generalized description of someone they might be looking for. I never had to rehearse my response should I ever be stopped by a store owner or a random person or the police. And I've been pulled over a few times in my life driving a car, but it never occurred to me that there was a chance that I would be removed from my car or handcuffed or beaten or killed for a minor infraction or malfunction of my car, or even just because of an assumption about who I am and what I might be doing. Walking down the street, I've never had the thought that I could be stopped for just walking down the street, or playing in a playground or at the beach or in my front yard. I never had the thought that someone could call the police on me or confront me about who I am or why I'm there. Being anywhere, I've never had to worry about looking suspicious or what I look like. In a store, or in a new car, or in a job interview. And then I thought about all the young people that have had their lives cut short or have experienced these things and how it has affected them and their families. And I was reminded of Tamir Rice, who was shot and killed by a police officer while playing in Cleveland Park. Tamir was 12. Tyra King was shot multiple times because he matched the description of a robber in the neighborhood. Tyra was 13. Ayanna Stanley Jones was shot and killed by police in her home while she was sleeping and without warning. She was sleeping. She was 7. Trayvon Martin was shot and killed by a neighborhood watch volunteer while walking home in his neighborhood. He was 17. Cameron Tillman was shot and killed by a police officer while hanging out with his friends in an abandoned house, but with the owner's consent. The officers offered no medical assistance even though he was alive for 45 minutes. Cameron was 14. Jordan Edwards was shot and killed by a police officer in a passenger seat of a car while leaving a party. He was 15. Kawani Carrington was shot and killed by a police officer outside a house in broad daylight while the cop was investigating a suspected break-in. But he was there, the owner knew he was there, and he was welcomed. He was 15. Deonta Farrell was shot and killed by a police officer while walking in a park because witnesses claimed he was walking in a park. Witnesses claimed he was holding a bag of chips, but the officers thought it was a gun. He was 12. All of that is just so unnecessary, and I know that we can all sit and think about our own children and our own childhoods and think about how we never had to think about that. We never had to worry that that might happen to us or our children because of the skin tone that we wear. And as we've seen play out over the course of the last few days in our community Facebook groups, in reaction to the announcement of this event, there are those in our community who openly and blatantly and unabashedly continue to respond to the injustices and the inequities of our society with whataboutisms, or by turning the conversation into an us versus them, or a black versus blue, or rationalizing that the American experience is the same for everyone regardless of name or skin tone, or resorting to shaming those who are committed to being here in person or in spirit today, including the children of our community who made this day happen. As we've seen it play out, there are still many in our community who are not able to walk in other people's shoes, or to reflect or consider the experiences of others and how they could differ from their own. And they refuse to acknowledge that the American experience is different for those of us with a different name or a different skin tone. They can't see the hundreds of years of history that we carry on our backs and drag along behind us from generation to generation to generation to generation, that built our neighborhoods and our institutions and our laws and our policies and our traditions and our sayings and our words and our actions. They just can't see it. I don't know how to make them see it. I just don't. But I do know that those of us who can see it, who do see it, need to step up and stand up and use our mouths and our hands and our bodies to say something and do something, and continue to say something and do something until finally the words are internalized and we have incorporated them into our lives and every day put ourselves in others' shoes and ask, what role do we play and how could we act in those circumstances and how can we make change happen? We must ask how we can ensure that everyone in our community lives under the same perceptions and social norms and without prejudice or bias and can expect to be seen and heard and treated just as everyone else. Today we start the work, as there is much work to be done. Today we must commit to opening our ears and our eyes and listen and reflect and understand. Today we must commit to not letting those opportunities for change, no matter how big or how small, pass us by without action, no matter the relationship nor the circumstance, nor the convenience. We must not commit to allowing those around us to verbalize or in their actions perpetuate generations of racism and bias. No matter how tired or busy or distracted we are from the day, today we must commit to hold our belief that everyone is equal and no one is less. Today we must commit to leaving behind our passive ways, our don't rock the boat attitudes, our inconvenience. Today we must commit to step up, to stand up, to do more, and to do better. Because in the words of President Obama, yes, we can.
Jennifer, you want to come up here? Thank you so much, Rachel. I want to introduce our next speaker today. She is a community member of Lake Mills. Her name is Jennifer Mata Oaks. Please give her a round of applause.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Jennifer Mata Oaks. The Mata is a Mexican name. I am proudly a Latina standing with Black Lives Matter. Que vivan nosotros por siempre juntos. Today I'm presenting excerpts from a letter from a Birmingham jail written by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. April 16th, 1963. My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and that your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I want to try to answer your statements in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should indicate why I'm here in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the view which argues against outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Several months ago, the affiliate here in Birmingham asked us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent, direct action program if such were deemed necessary. But more basically, I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages, as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community no alternative. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist, negotiation, self-purification, and direct actions. We have gone through all these steps in Birmingham. Negro leaders sought to negotiate with city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiations. As in so many past experiences, our hopes have been blasted, and the shadow of deep discontentment settled upon us. We had no alternative except to prepare for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and the national community. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You're quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and foster such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue so that it can no longer be ignored. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from bondage of myths and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, we must see the need for nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of understanding and brotherhood. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the word, wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you see the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to a public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, when you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep in your automobile because no motel will accept you, when you are humiliated day in and day out by the nagging signs reading white and colored, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. Then you will understand why we find it. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern, since we so diligently urge people to obtain the Supreme Court's decision in 1954 outlawing segregation in public schools. One has not only a legal, but a moral responsibility to obey unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral or the law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages the personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. Segregation, to use the terminology of the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber, substitutes I-it relationship for an I-thou relationship and ends up relegating persons to the status of things. Hence, segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, it is morally wrong and awful. Paul Tillich said that sin is separation. It is not segregation, and is not segregation an existential expression of man's tragic separation, his awful estrangement, his terrible sinfulness? Thus it is I urge men to obey the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court, for it is morally right. And I can urge them to disobey segregation ordinances, for they are morally wrong. One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly, lovingly, and with a willingness to accept a penalty. I submit that an individual who breaks a law that conscience tells him is unjust and who willingly accepts the penalty of imprisonment in order to arouse the conscience of the community over its injustice is in reality expressing the highest respect for law. Of course, there's nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was evidenced sublimely in the refusal of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar. In our own nation, the Boston Tea Party represented a massive act of civil disobedience. I must make two honest confessions to you. I must confess that over the past few years, I've been gravely disappointed with a white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in this stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. I had also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth concerning time in relation to the struggle for freedom. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. If one recognizes this vital urge that has engulfed the Negro community, one should readily understand why public demonstrations are taking place. This normal and healthy discontent can be channeled into the creative outlet of nonviolent direct action, and now this approach is being termed extremist. Though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? Amos an extremist for justice? Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel? Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but the kind of extremists we will be. Before closing, I feel impelled to mention another point in your statement that has troubled me profoundly. You warmly commend the Birmingham police force for keeping order and preventing violence. I doubt that you would have been so warmly commended the police force if you had seen its dogs sinking their teeth into unarmed, nonviolent Negroes. I doubt you would be so quickly to commend the police if you were to observe their ugly and inhumane treatment of Negroes here in the city jail. If you were to watch them push and curse old Negro women and young Negro girls, I cannot join you in your praise of the Birmingham Police Department. I wish you had commended the Negro sit-inners and demonstrators of Birmingham for their sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of great provocation. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the young high school and college students, the young ministers of the gospel and a host of their elders, courageously and nonviolently sitting in at lunch counters and willingly going to jail for conscience sake. One day the South will know when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King, Jr.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Our next performance, it will be a musical performance by our very own Lake Mills High School freshman, Hunter Davies.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Oh. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. And no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one.
Can you turn them down? I'm going to move them. Good job. Yeah.
Geez, that was beautiful. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Chief of Police Mick Selck.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Gracelyn, for inviting me to speak. It's an important time in our community and our country, and we all need to be part of the solution. I am truly honored to be here, but I feel that my words may fall short because I do not have all the answers. The murder of George Floyd at the hands of the Minneapolis Police Department shocked the world. It raised a lot of issues about race relations and police use of force. The anger and hurt fueled a fire that swept the planet. But the question is, how do we move forward and achieve important, long-lasting change? I could talk for hours on this, and when I'm done, it may feel like I did, but this is an important topic. I didn't want to wait. As you've seen from my Facebook posts, it's time to talk about this now, and that's why I'm here. And the dialogue that I'm going to present today will explain to you how we police here in Lake Mills. I cannot speak for all the law enforcement, but I can speak for the Lake Mills Police. For the members of my community, I want you to know where we are at, where we intend to go, and by making you aware, you can then have informed discussion about how to move forward. I believe in transparency, and I'm always available for discussion on these issues at length. So the Lake Mills Police Department has a non-discriminatory hiring practice. We advertise statewide to be inclusive and draw from a large, diverse pool of applicants. The applications do not include race or gender, so interviews are granted based solely upon qualifications alone. Our experience is few people of color and few women apply to be a Lake Mills police officer. Someone asked on Facebook if LMPD has ever had a black police officer. We did for a couple years. I guess he didn't notice. He is now a supervisor on another larger area, department nearby, still a good friend, and I talked to him just a couple weeks ago. We do have a bias in policing policy. We've had that since 2004, and it's been revised 3 times, most recently in 2018. In an effort to make sure the policy is inclusive as possible, I recently submitted it to be reviewed by a diversity instructor from MATC to make sure we are current and relevant as possible. LMPD has body cameras, squad cameras, building cameras, and we've had those for about 11 years now. Our video camera and body camera policy is available on our website for your review. Any law enforcement agency that has concerns about getting cameras, I will say this to you. If you are doing everything right, it should not matter. It has helped our officers on several occasions when someone has misrepresented the truth. Many times we have learned that with the use of cameras, the truth comes out. But cameras protect good cops. We have a citizen complaint procedure. Although I've only been chief for less than 2 years, and I've worked here since 1994. I'm not aware of a single person who's come to file an official complaint on improper use of force or on racial bias. All use of force incidents require a supervisor review and a review by the instructor who teaches that particular use of force. The state of Wisconsin has created a use of force tracking system so that when an agency uses force, it can now be tracked. Because for those of you who've tried to research this subject, it doesn't exist. Nobody's been keeping track, and that's not right, and that is being changed. If we are involved in a shooting, and Rachael spoke about many, they were traditionally investigated internally by their own people, their own department, making those decisions whether it was right or wrong. The state of Wisconsin has changed that. Now if there's an officer-involved shooting, that an outside agency must investigate that, must take lead on that. Several people have asked me about de-escalation. That is a regular part of our training in firearms, defense and arrest tactics, and taser. Scenario-based training is used to practice quick use of force decision-making in all use of force categories. We use scenario training with shoot, don't shoot, decision-making. Not shooting is a trained technique. Getting in your squad car and backing away is a trained technique. Not using your taser is a trained technique. I reiterate, we teach how to use and not to use force. Chokeholds have never been taught. In my entire career, I've never been in a class that asked us to use a chokehold, and I'm thankful for that. The knee on the neck that we saw in Minneapolis, that is not a trained technique. It was deplorable. The Lake Mills Police have received training in excited delirium. If you're not familiar with excited delirium, in circumstances of extreme drug intoxication, people who are acting physically violent for extended periods of time can overexert their system. Their body can begin to shut down, sometimes resulting in death. This one is difficult for police as the person needs immediate medical treatment that is beyond our capabilities. If someone dies, the media jumps on it as an in-custody death, even though it may be a medical issue. But we are trained to recognize when it's happening. We are trained to get emergency staff on their way. And that was not something I learned when I started in law enforcement. We are also trained to recognize positional asphyxia. This was also something that I was not trained when I started, back in the early 90s. After an arrest that involves physical exertion, whether running from an officer or wrestling with them, it can be hard for a suspect to catch their breath, especially if there are drugs involved or underlying health issues. Someone laying on their stomach or chest can potentially die. We are aware of this, and we move people who are handcuffed into what is called a recovery position and let them catch their breath. If difficulty breathing continues, we call an ambulance. We also have a backseat camera in our squad car, so that even when we're driving someone to the jail or the hospital, we have a visual on them behind us in the car so we can see if they go down. We can see and we can act immediately instead of showing up somewhere and opening the back door and seeing something wrong. For cooperative suspects, we have something that's called a restraint belt. It's just a simple leather belt with a little O-ring on it. We can hand keep people in front so that they don't have to overextend their shoulders or hurt their back, and it actually helps a little bit with the breathing, so that is something we also have in all of our squad cars. Every full-time officer in our department has attended crisis intervention training. This is a 40-hour class that teaches police officers how to recognize and react to common mental health issues and what resources are available for those people. The police department has added force options that would reduce the likelihood of using guns at incidents. In the old days, it was your hands, a club, or your gun. We now have more intermediate options to reduce the likelihood of an officer having to escalate to a gun. I'm hopeful that technology advances will create a type of device that can incapacitate a person without deadly consequences and eliminate the use of guns entirely. There have been some interesting advancements, but as a society, we just have not reached that level of technology yet. But even though our current intermediary options cause pain and discomfort, it is relatively short-lived. In the not-so-distant past, these painful incidents may have been deadly. A taser deployment is only 5 seconds, and you are limited to only 3 uses of it, and then you have to switch to something else. The taser deployment is a standard training practice where officers get tasered. We even had a prosecutor in Jefferson County agree to be tasered. We have waivers that if you want to come in and be tasered. I'm not asking, I'm not recruiting right now, but it's, I know that taser use has historically had some concerns about it. Please watch some Google videos on that to see how easily you recover. The movies and the TV make it look like you get knocked out for half an hour, and that is just not the case. But I believe Lieutenant Cedarwall has been tasered a few times. I don't see him right now. We also have what's commonly known as pepper spray, which is used to de-escalate combative persons who want to fight the police. In most people, the effect ranges from 20 to 40 minutes, but again, it reduces the need to escalate to a gun. As part of their training, officers get exposed to pepper spray. I did, and I can assure you, it is not fun. But there are no long-lasting effects either. People and the officer are more likely to take severe and long-lasting injuries in a physical fight than they are if they use a pepper spray or taser. And I do promise you that those alternatives, getting tased from pepper spray, it does suck. I don't have a better word for it. But they do save lives. They really do. We also have less lethal shotguns in our squad cars now. So again, that we do not have to deploy deadly force. We have options that can potentially save lives. We've received de-escalation training from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department SWAT commander, so that even in a major situation with an armed person who's barricaded in a home that we can de-escalate and calm the situation. I want you to know that since I became an officer in 1991, I've never had to use more force than just hands-on or physical control. I've never punched anyone, I've never tasered anyone, never pepper sprayed anyone, and I've never shot anyone. I have been fortunate in many ways and in that regard, but I want to reduce the stereotype that the police, or at least the Lake Mills police, use force as their first or best option. We truly try to resolve things verbally, and if we need to use force, it will be short-lived, and we will offer medical assistance immediately. It is written into our policies. Use of force will always be controversial. It never looks pretty. Please do not fall for the media sound bites where they show only 10 seconds of an officer using force without watching the whole event that led up to it. What the national media has become is shameful. Lopsided reporting on both sides, insightful adjectives and polarized viewpoints. The media is selling commercials. It has gone from a neutral, fact-finding reporting system to a reality show. So please do your research. Please be informed. The media is actively searching for use of force issues to put on TV. Hey, buddy. That's the counter-protest, I think. So, they're actively searching for use of force issues to put on TV that occur between white officers and black citizens. They know it will incite people. All use of force should be important, but that does not sell commercials. If all use of force incidents were on TV, you would see the mix of races and the events that precede the use of force. But the media chooses the ones that they let you see. And how they let you see it is very deliberate and harmful to our society. So do your own research, look things up. The ACLU has created a list of force policy implementations that they believe key law enforcement techniques to reduce the use of force. It is called the 8 Can't Wait. I'm proud to say that 7 out of 8 were in place already here in Lake Mills. The 8th one is being implemented this month, and that concerned officers stepping in to stop other officers who may be using force incorrectly or using too much. It requires them to step in. We are proactive, but we are not perfect. We are always looking ways to improve our citizen contacts and appreciate any and all feedback we can get. Recently, I reached out on Facebook and the newspaper to start a dialogue with people of color, and I received many responses. I have some meetings set up this week to discuss how we as a police department can be more sensitive to racial issues. But systemic change does not fall just on the police department. We all have to do better. Every day with small kindnesses, every day with inclusivity, every day with respect, every day with responsible social media use. I wish social media could somehow fact check every post. I wish I could call out every lie I see on the Facebook page or every misinformed opinion that a keyboard warrior can throw out there from the safety of their home. Some even using false names to incite and to troll. Please use your Facebook responsibly and do not believe everything you read. People can be mean and ignorant and flat out liars. Do not do your own research. Make your own opinion based on facts, not rhetoric. The violence and looting is hurting our own communities, including people of color. I was watching a video last night from an activist named Killer Mike. He's a great guy. He's great. And he advocated, take your feelings to your polls and vote in the change that you want. Go to your elected leaders and your police chiefs and start the dialogue and start the conversation. But violence is not the answer. A couple years ago, a lady standing right here posted a picture on Facebook that said, "Hate does not make America great." She's absolutely right. Hate does not bring us together, but it drives a wedge between us. Find the commonalities and use those as a starting point for dialogue. As a police department, we'll strive to be better. We'll strive to be as neutral in all things as possible. We'll strive to seek peaceful resolutions, understanding equity and justice for all. My door is always open, so please tell me how we can improve. Last, I am thankful that here in Lake Mills we have built and maintained a level of trust and professionalism with our community, that we can partner for positive, effective, long-lasting results. It is discouraging to hear on a national scale that the very things that we are here talking about, prejudice towards human beings and making biased decisions about them, is occurring, but even by the very same people who are asking for it to stop. It hurts for those of us in law enforcement to all be lumped into this one group, to be judged by our worst members, to have an officer attacked and murdered for someone else's actions. No police officers support what happened to George Floyd. We are outraged as well, but ostracizing all police is wrong. It is biased and it's discriminatory. Every police officer you meet chose a career field that at any hour of any day may be their last, defending and helping people they have never met. They should be thanked, and many of you in Lake Mills know this. The outpouring from many of you has been amazing, and I thank you very much for that. I want to thank all my officers who came in here on a beautiful Saturday to help to make this event safe. I'm especially proud that every one of them that are here volunteered to be here. We care about you, we care about our community, and we give back to ensure your safety. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for having me. I'm truly, truly honored. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. It's so nice to know that our Lake Mills Police Department is so proactive on this issue and working to make their police department better for the sake of us. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Michelle Quednow. She is an admin of a Facebook group that's called the Lake Mills Citizens Coalition for Racial Justice. I recommend that you all check it out. They've been very proactive about posting great resources for educating yourself on issues like these. So please give Michelle a round of applause.
Thank you, Gracelyn. That was a wonderful introduction, and I am so honored to be able to speak to you today. As a descendant, some of you may have already seen on the Facebook Community Network that I speak to you as someone whose great-great-great-grandparents were part of the foundation. So as such, I see that myself and my family are part of the future. That's why I speak to you today. Legendary Lake Mills. My grandparents were born, lived, and died here. Their grandparents born, lived, and died here, and their grandparents born, lived, and died here. I guess you could call them Lake Mills lifers. For the first 18 years of my life, I came to this town about one time a month. It felt more like home then than my own hometown, probably because of the welcoming nature the smiles everyone had when they saw my grandmother in Century, and everybody knew my grandmother. Or at Peanuts, UCC for the win. Going to the grocery store could have been a short trip had it not been for the conversations. Going to breakfast with my grandfather at the corner. Sitting there with the men while the woman behind the counter hastily put in coffee, listening but not listening to the conversations. The men of the town having their conversations about a smattering of things, nothing controversial though. Sports, gas prices, farm equipment that might have gone down and they had suggestions for one another. You know, safe stuff. My grandmother had bridge club, where the latest gossip was shared, of course, along with coffee and finger sandwiches. You might as well call it Mayberry. This is what made Lake Mills legendary for me. Men and women communicating through conversation, sometimes discourse, but always respectful and mindful of the friendships they have with others. Talking about anything controversial could be uncomfortable, and it would be considered impolite back then because you might risk losing a friend. But it was and is the importance of being there for each other, coming together when things went wrong, no matter your political affiliation or socioeconomic status. Neighbors were there for neighbors, no matter what. That same quality of good conversation, exchanging pleasantries at the grocery store or on the street, meeting up for coffee or wine or beer to add levity to the conversation, it still happens in this beautiful town. This peaceful town that houses generations upon generations of memories founded on the love of neighbor and friend, working together to build, grow, and change. It is this peace that makes us complacent. And we need to build a different bridge. Difficult conversations are uncomfortable. They are humbling. They are scary. Learning that your neighbor, friend, maybe even a relative, but you probably already know the relative, may have opinions about something that you feel differently. It's easy, so easy to turn away and go back to casual conversations about gas prices, farm equipment, the latest gossip. But change is growth. And we are at the precipice of growing as a community again. Only before we grow any more in number, we must grow together in love and build bridges of communication to help those who are experiencing the injustices that we may not see here or we may not hear about, but that doesn't mean they don't happen. To help those who struggle to see the barriers of our brothers and sisters of a different color. Lost my page. And those, believe it or not, and I did some digging, those who are asked to move away because the fear is they might impregnate a white girl. That happened here in Lake Mills, in our history, in the last 100 years. And it's to help those who are silenced by powerful policies and procedures which need reform immediately, if not here, then somewhere else. This is my hometown. This is home. Where my husband and I built our family, where our children play with the neighborhood children, build their own connections, and learn the morals of this community, founded upon the morals passed down from generation upon generation. Only this time, it's slightly different. Legendary Lake Mills can be legendary for a variety of reasons, but we can make it legendary for building the bridges of communication, of education, and breaking down some of the traditions of mindset. The difficult conversations that we need to have are not easy, and they are not fun. But my friends, Alais Fortier-Meyer, Andrea Graham, and Rhiannon Tony started this group on Facebook called the Lake Mills Citizens Coalition for Racial Justice. And they recently added me on as an admin too, which was an honor I cannot even put into words. The mission statement is simple: to unite citizens of Lake Mills who are concerned with the issue of racism and implement change within our community. Kind of like Bridge Club. We gotta have those conversations. You see, the more people we have in this, the more we have the opportunity for discourse from multiple perspectives. Simply put, we grow together when we learn together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. We have 2 more speakers today, and I would like to introduce our next co-creator of the Lake Mills Citizens Coalition for Racial Justice, Alais Fortier-Meyer.
Hello, Lake Mills. My name is Alais Fortier-Meyer, and I am co-creator of this new coalition we put together, as I mentioned. And I just wanted to say thank you all so much for being here. It's actually really, really important for the members of our community to be here today. I've thought a lot about what I wanted to say today. Like some of the others said, there's endless amounts of things that we could say. And I think many of you who are here, who like myself, care deeply about the people in our community. You want to ensure that this community is welcoming for all people and people of color. And maybe you know you want to make things better, but you're not really sure how you can make things better. So mostly what I want to say is, white people, let's do better. Let's do better to change the system. It's not just the bigot troll on Facebook, or the ignorant coworkers' jokes, or the All Lives Matter folks whose hearts and minds we must change. But it is also the institutionalized racism that seeds are so deeply sown within the history of our nation that we are up against. We need to help people understand that all lives should matter, but that right now the message our society sends is that Black lives don't matter. When all lives matter, people of color won't need to fear the police. When all lives matter, Black mothers won't worry when they send their teenage sons to the store at dusk. When all lives matter, mass incarceration will not be based on skin color. When all lives matter, racism against Blacks will not constitute a public health crisis. When all lives matter, in the context of this very broken system that we are all a part of, we will no longer have to explain to anyone anymore why Black lives matter. So, Let's read, watch, and listen to change the system. Let's learn to change the system. Let's educate each other and our children to change the system. Let's use our privilege to change the system. Break the silence to change the system. End the violence to change the system. We are all in this together. I don't stand here today with all of the answers on how to solve things. I'd be a fool to claim that. I'm here today to bring attention to this issue and to encourage all of you to take part in the work that we must do within this community to make it a better place for all of us, but also especially for people of color. We should take this opportunity to open a dialogue with our police force, our schools, churches, government, and other local institutions. I'd like to personally thank Chief Selck for his participation today. I'm sure he probably has gotten some flack for that. But I think it speaks volumes about the police force we have here. And I am also filled with hope and inspiration by the younger generation's courage and grit to stand up for what is right, as exemplified by Gracelyn Smith, who was the catalyst for this important gathering today. This community, we are so lucky to have her. She did not hesitate to organize this. So many people could have done nothing, and she just decided to do it. So we all have a lot to owe her for that today. Acknowledging our own involvement in the perpetuation of racism is not easy, but it's long overdue. White people need to stop thinking of racism as only something that bad people do. All white people are a product of a systemically racist society, and because of that, even good people think racist thoughts. What makes good people better is to recognize these thoughts and behaviors in themselves and make a commitment to do better. And we can all do better. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alais. Now, before I introduce our final speaker, I want to get a video of everybody with their signs in the air, so please make some noise for the next few seconds, okay? Thank you so much, guys. Our next speaker is Lake Mills High School junior, MaClain Mahone.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is MaClain Mahone. I'm extremely grateful that such an amazing, kind, educated person as Gracelyn put this all together. Along with excitement, I am very nervous being up here today. Not because of my speaking ability or because I'm scared I'm going to talk softly, but because this is the first time I've ever talked about this with people other than my parents and close friends. From the second Gracie first announced this event to us coming together today, there were over 1,000 posts and comments on Facebook related to it. Many of the posts were supportive. However, a number of them were focused on fear and denial of this issue. The belief that there was no possible way racism could be present in our small town. Some of these posts saddened me, but it helped me realize why events like this are needed. In addition to the Facebook posts, I had an acquaintance A kid I sat next to in class tell me that they were a racist and threatened me because of my involvement in this event. This again showed me the importance of me coming up here today. For anyone who doesn't know, my mom is white and my dad is black. They have been married for over 20 years. Growing up, I only saw a combination of our two families. My dad's side of the family loved my mom, and my mom's side of the family loved my dad. My grandmas, my Nana and my Mimi loved each other. Both sides of my family have had to overcome adversity based on my parents' marriage, whether that be just dirty looks or actual words being said. This is why we are one big family, because we realize we are stronger together. This helped shape my mindset growing up, where I didn't see color. I was just a little girl who didn't realize that some people may see me differently because of my family and I's skin color. But of course, my little bubble popped. My first memory of an experience based on race was at Lake Mills Elementary School when a little girl told me she couldn't play with me because I was black. My dad and my brother have had more experiences like this than I can count. With the recent death of George Floyd, it opened my eyes further to the scary reality that no 16-year-old kid should have to think about. The reality that that could be my brother, that could be my father, that could be me. In the land of the free, black people should be able to do things without the fear of being harmed or killed, like go for a jog. Ahmaud Arbery couldn't. Relax in their own home. Breonna Taylor couldn't. Play with a toy gun. 12-year-old Tamir Rice couldn't. Breathe. Eric Garner and George Floyd couldn't. The list goes on and will continue to grow if something doesn't change. Lake Mills is becoming more and more diverse with every grade that enters the school system. I have seen more African American children in our elementary and middle school than I have ever seen in this community. This is absolutely amazing and shows our town's growth. But this is also why we need to continue, as the young adults and adults in this community, to educate ourselves so we can educate these children. Change isn't going to happen immediately. Many of you may be asking yourselves, what can I do right now? What can I do tomorrow? What can I do when my kids or when I go back to school? In the past couple of weeks, I've asked myself to come up with some basics, some little things to remember. Don't touch my hair. Although you may mean well, it makes me feel like a pet. Don't tell me that I don't even look black. I don't even sound black. If you have a preconceived idea of what black people are supposed to sound like, remember, not all black people sound the same, just like no one here today sounds the same. Don't tell me that I don't even look black. No matter what I may appear to look like, I am a black woman and I will always be a black woman. Don't compare your tan you got on spring break to the color of my skin. Your tan doesn't come with 400 years of oppression. Your tan doesn't change the way people view you. Your tan isn't viewed as a weapon. Your tan will fade, mine will not. Before I'm finished here today, I want to read this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. There comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe, nor political, nor popular. But he must take it because conscience tells him it's right. That time is now. I want to thank every teacher, friend, parent, and member of this community who has stood by and will continue to stand by me in times like these. You see me for me, not the color of my skin. Thank you to everyone who gathered here today, whether that was because you personally wanted to, your parents forced you, or you just wanted to see what it's about. The fact is, you're here, ready to make change happen. Thank you. Thank you. We will now be taking a moment of silence for the 8 minutes and 46 seconds the Minneapolis police officer kneeled on George Floyd's neck.
8 minutes and 46 seconds. This protest today is nowhere near the end of the fight for racial justice and equality. When you go home today, I encourage you to talk to each other about racism, educate yourself, and also do more than just talk. Donate to Color of Change, the NAACP, the Bail Project. Google petitions that you can sign to make a difference. Thank you all for coming out today. I really appreciate it.